Welcome, everyone. It's Thursday night. Now, I don't want to keep you long because this is a little bit of a long chapter, but I will do my best to make it as fun for you so that we can fall asleep in the state of the wish fulfilled. And I know my child thinks he's whispering, right? But that's the loudest whisper I've ever heard. But you know how it is. So let me flip over to the lecture. Remember, we are reading The Law and the Promise by Neville Goddard. We are on chapter 13. So let us begin. Noah? Noah? That's loud. I can hear you. Anyway, hey, Cyber. Just in time because I'm just about to flip over to the lecture and start reading. I'm just making sure all my volumes are up as they should be. And, all right, let us begin. The Law and the Promise. Chapter 13. All Trivia. General knowledge is remote knowledge. It is in particulars that wisdom consists and happiness too. William Blake. Whatever does he mean? We must use our imagination to achieve particular ends, real Ruby, even if the ends are all trivia. Because men do not clearly define and imagine particular ends, the results are uncertain, while they might be perfectly certain. Do you get what that means? Let me highlight it because it's pretty important. Because men do not clearly define and imagine particular ends, the results are uncertain, while they might be perfectly certain. Well, how do you make them certain? To imagine particular ends is to discriminate clearly. Discriminate? Whatever do you mean, Angela? How do we distinguish the oak from the beech, the horse from the ox? By the bounding outline. Definition asserts the reality of the particular thing against the formless generalizations which flood the mind. I think that one's pretty obvious, isn't it? Definition asserts the reality of the particular thing against the formless generalizations which flood the mind. Now, CJ, I don't even know what that means, but I don't know. Hey, welcome to the space. But if you have astigmatism, right? You know, astigmatism, I think it's the misshapen, it's the misshaping of the, is it the cornea? I don't remember. Which means if I take my glasses off, everything is blurry, right? It's blurry. So this is why you're asked the question, how do we distinguish between the oak tree and the beech tree? How do we distinguish between the horse and the ox? By the bounding outline. You see, even though having astigmatism doesn't bother me enough to say I want to change it, so that's why it's there. But you can see the general outline of something. It's just not crisp. There's no clarity. Thus the corrective lens. Hello, Evie. So what he's saying to us in this, to imagine particular ends is to discriminate clearly, which is to define the objective. Okay? Life on earth is a kindergarten for image making. The bigness or littleness of the object to be created is not in itself important. The great and golden rule of art, as well as of life, said William Blake, is this: that the more distinct, sharp, and wiry the bounding line, the more perfect the work of art, and the less keen and sharp, the greater is the evidence of weak imitation. Ah. You got to hear it again. The more distinct, sharp, and wiry the bounding lines or the boundary of something, the more perfect the work of art. Why is that? Because you can see it clearly. But less keen and sharp, well, the greater is the evidence of weak imitation. What is it that builds a house and plants a garden but the definite and the determinate? If you leave out this line, will you leave out life itself? Now, the following stories are concerned with the acquiring of seemingly little things, or toys, as I call them, but they are important because of the clear, imaginal images that created the toys. The author of the first story is one of whom it is said, well, she has everything. This is true. She has financial, social, and intellectual security. But here's what she writes. Dear Neville, as you know, through your teaching and through my practice of that teaching, I have completely changed myself and my life. 2 weeks ago, when you spoke of toys, I realized I had never used my imagination for the getting of things, and I decided it would be fun to try it. You told of a young woman who was given a hat by merely wearing that hat in her imagination. The last thing on earth I needed was a hat, but I wanted to test my imagination for this getting of things. So I selected a hat pictured in a fashion magazine. I cut the picture out and stuck it on the mirror of my dressing table. I studied the picture carefully. Then I shut my eyes, and in my imagination, I put that hat on my head and wore it as I walked out of the house. I did this just once. The following week, I met some friends for luncheon, and one of them was wearing the hat. Now, we all admired it. The very next day, I received the parcel by special delivery messenger. The hat was in the parcel. The friend who had worn it the day before had sent the hat to me with a note saying, well, she did not particularly care for the hat and didn't know why she had bought it in the first place. But for some reason, she thought it would look well on me. And would I please accept it? Written by G.L. Movement from dreams to things is the power driving humanity. Say it again. Movement from dreams to things is the power driving humanity. We must live wholly on the level of imagination, and it must be consciously and deliberately undertaken. Now, all my life, I have loved birds. I enjoy watching them and hearing their chatter and feeding them, and I am particularly fond of the small sparrow. For many months, I have fed them crumbs of morning bread, wild bird seed, and anything I believed they would eat. And for all those months, I have been frustrated as I watched the larger birds, particularly the pigeons, command the area, gobbling up most of the good seed and leaving the husks for my sparrows. To use my imagination on this problem seemed facetious to me at first, but the more I thought of it, the more interesting the idea became. So, one night I set about seeing the little birds come in for their full share of daily offerings, and I would tell my wife that the pigeons no longer interfered with my sparrows, but took their share like gentlemen and then left the area. I continued this imaginary action for almost 1 month. And then one morning I noticed that the pigeons had disappeared. The sparrows had breakfast all to themselves for a few days. For those few days, no larger bird entered the area. They did return eventually, but to this day they have never again infringed on the area occupied by my sparrows. They stay together, eating what I put out for them, leaving a full share of the area to my tiny friends. And do you know, I actually believe the sparrows understand. They no longer seem to be afraid when I walk among them. RK. This lady proves that unless our heart is in the task, unless we imagine ourselves right into the feeling of our wish fulfilled, well, we are not there. For we are all imagination and must beware what we are in imagination. She writes, in early February, my husband and I had been in our new house 1 month. A home, lovely beyond telling, perched on a rugged cliff with the ocean for our front yard. Wind and sky for neighbors, and seagulls for guests. We were ecstatic. If you have experienced the joy and woe of building your own home, you know how completely filled with happiness you are and how completely empty your purse is. 100 lovely things clamored to be bought for that house. But the one thing we wanted most of all was the most useless. A picture. Not just any picture, but a wild, wonderful scene of the sea dominated by a great white clipper ship. This picture had been in our thoughts all the months of building, and we left one living room wall free of paneling to hold it. My husband mounted decorative red and green ship lanterns on the wall to frame our picture, but the picture itself would have to wait. Draperies, carpeting, all the practical items must come first. Perhaps so, but that didn't stop either one of us from seeing that picture in our imagination on that wall. One day while shopping, I strolled into a small art gallery, and as I walked through the door, I stopped so suddenly, a gentleman walking behind me crashed into an easel. Now, I apologized and pointed to a painting hanging at the head height across the room. That's what did it. I've never seen anything so wonderful. He introduced himself as the owner of the gallery and said, well, yes, that's an original by the greatest English painter of clipper ships the world has known. He went on to tell me about the artist, but I wasn't listening. I could not take my eyes from that wonderful ship, and suddenly I experienced a very strange thing. It was only a moment in time, but the art gallery faded, and I saw that picture on my wall. I'm afraid the owner thought me a little giddy, and I was. But I finally managed to return my attention to his voice when he mentioned an astronomical price. I smiled and said, well, perhaps someday. And he continued to tell me about the painter and also about an American artist who was the only living lithographer capable of copying the great English master. He said, well, if you're very lucky, you may pick up one of his prints. Well, I've seen his work. It's perfect down to the last detail. Many people prefer prints to paintings. Prints or paintings, I knew nothing about the values of either. And anyway, all I wanted was that scene. When my husband returned home that evening, I talked of nothing but that painting and pleaded with him to visit the gallery and see it. Maybe we could find a print of it somewhere. The man said, well, yes, he interrupted, but you know we can't afford any picture now. And our conversation ended there. But that night after dinner, I stood in our living room and saw that picture on our wall. The next day, my husband had an appointment with a client which he did not want to keep. But the appointment was kept, and my husband did not return home until after dark. When he walked through the front door, I was busy in another part of the house and called a greeting to him. A few moments later, I heard hammering and walked into the living room to see what he was doing. On our wall hung my picture. In my first moment of intense joy, I remembered the man in the art gallery saying, if you're very lucky, you may pick up one of his prints. Lucky? Well, here is my husband's part of this story. He said, making the call already mentioned, he entered one of the poorest, meanest little houses he had ever been in. The client introduced himself and led my husband into a tiny, dark dining area where the two of them sat down at a bare table. As my husband put his briefcase on the tabletop, he looked up and saw the picture on the wall. And he confessed to me he had conducted a very sloppy interview because he couldn't take his eyes from that picture. The client signed the contract and gave a check as down payment, which, as my husband believed at the time, was $10 short. Mentioning this fact to the client, he said the check given was every cent he could afford, but added, "I've noticed your interest in that picture. It was here when I took this place, and I don't know to whom it belonged, but I don't want it. If you'll put the $10 in for me, I'll give you the picture." When my husband returned to his company's main office, he learned he had been in error about the amount. He was not charged $10. Our picture is on the wall, and it cost us nothing. Signed AA. Now, RL writes this: "In faith, lady, you have a merry heart. One day during a bus strike, I needed to go into the downtown area and had to walk 10 blocks from my home to the nearest bus in operation. Before starting home, I recalled there was no food market on this new route, and I wouldn't be able to shop for dinner. Now, I had enough to manage a potluck meal, but I would need bread. After shopping all day, the 10 blocks back from the bus line was all I could manage, and to go still further to a shop for bread was completely out of the question. I stood very still for a moment and allowed a vision of bread to dance in my head. And then I started for home. When I boarded the bus, I was so tired. I grabbed the first available seat and almost sat on a paper bag. Now, on a crowded bus, tired passengers rarely look directly at one another. So, being naturally curious, I peeked into the bag. And of course, it was a loaf of bread. Not just any bread, but the very same brand of bread I always buy. Signed by RL. Trifles. All trifles. But they produced their trivia without price. Imagining accomplished these things without the means generally reputed necessary to do so. What does that mean? Without the means generally reputed necessary to do so. Meaning they didn't have any money to do what they wanted to do. You see, man rates wealth in a way that bears no relation to real values. Come, buy wine and milk without money and without price. Isaiah 55, verse 1. Well, we're on a roll. So let's read chapter 14 as well. Chapter 14, the creative moment. The natural man does not receive the gifts of the Spirit of God, for they are folly to him. And he's not able to understand them because they are spiritually discerned. 1 Corinthians 2, verse 14. There is a moment in each day that Satan cannot find, nor can his watch fiends find it. But the industrious find this moment and it multiply. And when it once is found, it renovates every moment of the day if rightly placed. That is by William Blake. You see, whenever we imagine things as they ought to be rather than as they seem to be, is the moment. Oh, Angela, can you read that part again, please? Yes, I can. Whenever we imagine things as they ought to be rather than as they seem to be, that is the moment. For in that moment, the spiritual man's work is done, and all the great events of time start forth to mold a world in harmony with that moment's altered pattern. You've heard, once you make a decision, the whole world conspires to make it happen. That's exactly what that just said. For in that moment, the spiritual man's work is done, and all the great events of time start forth to mold a world in harmony with that moment's altered pattern. Satan, William Blake writes, is a reactor. He never acts, he only reacts. And if our attitude to the happenings of the day is reactionary, are we not playing Satan's part? Oh, hello? I know nobody wants to hear that, but let me say it again a little slower. Satan is a reactor. He never acts, he only reacts. And if our attitude to the happenings of the day is reactionary, are we not playing Satan's part? Ain't nobody call you Satan. Let's just get that out of the way. Nobody called you Satan. You were just told if you react to the day, you are playing his part. Oh, but listen, man is only reacting in his natural or Satan state. Satan is a state. He never acts or creates, he only reacts or recreates. One real creative moment, one real feeling of the wish fulfilled is worth more than the whole natural life of reaction. In such a moment of God's work, in such a moment, God's work is done. Hmm? Once more, we may say with William Blake, God only acts and is in existing beings or men. There is an imaginal past and an imaginal future. If by reacting, the past is recreated into the present, so by acting out our dreams of fancy, can the future be brought into the present. Hello? I said that how many times now? You go by memory, it's the past. So you're recreating the past memory into the present moment. So if you are going to be acting out your dreams of fancy, what are you doing? What you act out in the future is brought into the present. Eh? Eh? So the thing that you bring from the past can only be what it is, a recreation of the same thing. But, but, the thing you bring forward from the future, that is what you want to become. The thing in the past is what you remain being. Huh? You remain being that thing you remember. Remember, remain, you know? You remember, you remain. You imagine, you create. Oh, oh. Can you remember that one? If you remember it, you remain as you are. But if you rehearse, you rehearse, you become what you rehearse. I should write that down. Because, shoot, I surprised myself with that one. Hmm. Wow. It says, I feel now the future in the instant. The spiritual man acts. For him, anything that he wants to do, he can do and do at once in his imagination. And his motto is always, the moment is now. Behold, now is the acceptable time. Behold, now is the day of salvation. 2 Corinthians 6, verse 2. Nothing stands between man and the fulfillment of his dream but facts. And facts are the creations of imagining. If man changes his imagining, he will change the facts. Good evening, that deal. I see you. This story tells of a young woman who found the moment, and by acting out her dream of fancy, brought the future into the instant, not realizing what she had done until the final scene. Oh, tell me more. The incident related below must appear to be coincidence to those never exposed to your teachings, Neville. But I know I observed an imaginative act take solid form in perhaps 4 minutes. I believe you will be interested in reading this account, written down exactly as it happened, a few minutes after the actual occurrence yesterday morning. I was driving my car east on Sunset Boulevard, in the center lane of traffic, braking slowly to stop for a red signal at a three-way intersection. Then my attention was caught by the sight of an elderly lady dressed all in gray running across the street in front of my car. And her arm was raised, signaling to the driver of a bus which was beginning to pull away from the curb. She was obviously attempting to cross in front of the bus to delay it. The driver slowed his vehicle and I thought would allow her to enter. Instead, as she jumped onto the curb, the bus pulled off, leaving her standing just in the act of lowering her arm. Jerk. I digress. She turned and walked swiftly toward a nearby phone booth. As my signal changed to green and I put my car in motion, I wished I had been behind the bus and had been able to offer her a ride. Her extreme agitation was obvious even from the distance I was away from her. My wish instantly fulfilled itself in a mental drama, and as I drove away, the fancy played itself out in the following scene. I opened the car door, and a lady dressed in gray stepped in, smilingly relieved and thanking me profusely. She was out of breath from running and said, "Whew, I only have a few blocks to go. I'm meeting friends, and I was so afraid they would leave without me when I missed my bus." I left my imaginary lady out a few blocks further on, and she was delighted to observe her friends still waiting for her. She thanked me again and walked away. The entire mental scene was spanned in the time it takes to drive 1 block at a normal rate of speed. The fancy satisfied my feelings regarding the real incident, and I immediately forgot it. 4 blocks further, I was still in the center lane and again had to stop for a red signal. My attention at this time was turned inward on something I have now forgotten. When suddenly someone tapped on the closed window of my car, and I looked up to see a lovely appearing elderly lady with gray hair, dressed all in gray. Smiling, she asked if she might ride a few blocks with me, as she had missed her bus, and as she was out of breath, as though from running. And I was so stunned by her sudden appearance in the middle of a busy street at my window that for a moment I could only react physically. And without answering, I leaned over and opened my car door. She got in and said, "Ah, it's so annoying to rush so and then miss a bus. I wouldn't have imposed on you like this, but I'm supposed to meet some friends a few blocks down the street. And if I had to walk now, I would miss them." 6 blocks further on, she exclaimed, "Oh, good, they're still waiting for me." I let her out, and she thanked me again and walked away. I'm afraid I drove to my own destination by automatic reflex, for I had fully recognized that I had just observed a waking dream take form in physical action. I recognized what was happening while it was happening. As soon as I could, I wrote down each part of the incident and found a startling consistency between the waking dream and the subsequent reality. Both women were elderly, gracious in manner, dressed all in gray, and out of breath from hurrying to catch a bus and missing it. Both wished to meet friends who, for some reason, could not wait for them much longer, and both left my car within the space of a few blocks after successfully completing their contact with their friends. I am amazed, confounded, and elated. If there is no such thing as coincidence or accident, then I witnessed imagination become reality almost instantaneously. Submitted by J.R.B. There is a moment in each day that Satan cannot find, nor can his watch fiends find it. But the industrious find this moment and it multiply. When it once is found, it renovates every moment of the day if rightly placed. From the first time I read your search, Neville, I have longed to experience a vision. Since you have told us of the promise, this desire has been intensified. I want to tell you of my vision, which was a glorious answer to my prayer, but I am sure I would not have had this experience were it not for something that occurred 2 weeks ago. It was necessary for me to park my car some distance from the university building where I was scheduled to conduct my class. As I left my car, I was conscious of the stillness about me. The street was completely deserted. No one was in sight. Suddenly, I heard a most frightful cursing voice. I looked toward the sound and saw a man brandishing a cane, yelling between vile words, "I'll kill you! I'll kill you!" Well, I continued on as he approached me, for at that moment I thought, well, now I can test what I have professed to believe. If I do believe we are one, the Father, this derelict, and I, no harm can come to me. At that moment, I had no fear. Instead of seeing a man coming toward me, I felt a light. He stopped yelling, dropped his cane, and walked quietly as we passed with less than a foot between us. Having tested my faith at that moment, everything about me had seemed more alive than before. Flowers brighter and trees greener. I have had a sense of peace and the oneness of life I had not known before. And last Friday, I drove to our country home. Nothing was unusual about the day or evening. I worked on a manuscript, and not being tired, did not try to fall off to sleep until around 2 the following morning. And then I turned off the light and drifted into that floating sensation, not asleep, but drowsy. Well, that's what I call it, half awake and half asleep. Often while in this state, lovely unknown faces float before me, but this morning, the experience was different. A perfect face of a child came before me in profile, and then it turned and smiled at me. It was glowing with light and seemed to fill my own head with light. I was aglow and excited and thought this must be the Christos, but something within me, without sound, said, "No, this is you." What now? I feel I will never be the same again, and someday I may experience the promise. Submitted by GB. Our dreams will all be realized from the time that we know that imagining creates reality and act. But imagination seeks from us something much deeper and more fundamental than creating things. Nothing less indeed than the recognition of its own oneness with God. That's what it does is in reality. God himself doing it in and through man who is all imagination. There you have it. Chapter 13 and chapter 14. Now tonight I trust that those stories inspired you. I trust that they did. Nothing stands between man and the fulfillment of his dream but facts. And facts are the creations of imagining. Mhm. To remember is to redo. Is that what I said? But to imagine is to create. Tonight, as we slide into the silence for 5 minutes, the moment is now. Is it not? The moment is now. Now is the appointed time. I love how he says it here. There is an imaginal past and an imaginal future. I mean, I said it this morning to you. Between the remembering and the setting down of a new neurological pathway, you're doing exactly the same thing. One of them will keep you doing what you've always done, which is to remember. But when you rehearse, now you create a different outcome. That's why I stress to you today to rehearse. Hmm? Rehearse. There is an imaginal past and an imaginal future. If by reacting, the past is recreated into the present, so by acting out our dreams of fancy, can the future be brought into the present. So you see, my beautiful friends, when the scientists tell you that the brain doesn't know if you're remembering something or you're looking at a picture, it doesn't differentiate. Do you understand what that means? It's right here in this sentence. You can bring the past memory forward into right here and relive it. Or you can rehearse a new scene and have it set itself down in your neurological pathways and live that one out. But either way, you are moving something from somewhere and bringing it to the present moment. So when you bring this thing to the present moment, when you bring it to the present moment, have it be something that is worthwhile to think about. Have it be something that is worthy of your time to invest in it. What good is it to sit and recall the past over and over and over again? Because remember, it's not in the past anymore. The moment you remember it and you feel it, it is now. That's why when you rehearse and you feel it, it is now. Right? So remember, to rehearse is to live from the end. To live from the end or to think of, remember the difference? To live from the end or to think of, oh, it would be so nice if. That's thinking of it. But to think from it is to act out or to rehearse what you would be doing in reality if you were the man or the woman you wanted to be. So you rehearse here in your mind's eye, just right here in your mind's eye. Rehearse in your mind's eye because you are now living from that moment, from this moment. I can't. Life has begun. I digress. You know, you got to put some Shania Twain in there somewhere. Hello. So tonight, as we slide into the silence, what do you want to become? Every single one of them. She wanted that painting, but they didn't have no more money. They were all out of money. I'm all out of cash, is what she was saying. They didn't have any money. Not a dime extra they didn't have. She went and she saw that painting, but she didn't see it in the shop. She saw it in her house, in her mind's eye. All three of these stories, if memory serves me correctly, everybody stopped on a dime. They just stopped right where they were and they got into their imagination. What you rehearse, you become. So tonight, as we slide into the silence for 5 minutes, what are you rehearsing? What are you saying to yourself? Because what we rehearse, we become. You embody it. So if you've embodied it, it means you've put it on. And once you've put it on, well, it's you. Anywho, Shea Butter, I see you. That deal. Hello, Evie, CJ, and who else is here? Yerny Lopez. Real Ruby is here. Cyber is here. Maybe even BB is here. Twitter, well, Twitter is as Twitter is. Who's on Fanbase tonight? We've got the lovely KZ, we've got Casey, we've got Miss Fawn. Hey, Miss Fawn. We got Moon and Dolphin Duck. We got Miss Miriam, and we got Flo Smile. So as you slide into the silence tonight, what do you want to become? Don't just think about it, because then you're just thinking about it. You have to rehearse it. Rehearse it. And know that what you rehearse, you become. You go to Kung Fu, you rehearsing them moves, wax on, wax off. You go to Tai Chi, you go to Qi Gong, you're rehearsing them moves over and over and over again. You go to work, you rehearse your role every day. So you see, that which you rehearse, you become. So that's why when you rehearse, you make it worth your while. Because what do you want to become? Hello? Mm. You see what makes all things possible? The fact that you rehearse it. But you know what? Let me not preach in here because it is bedtime. And I'm trying my best to not get all fired up. So I'm keeping it laid back. So just examine yourself. Don't judge. What do you want to become? Name it. And begin to experience or rehearse in imagination what you would be doing naturally if you were what you said you were. And also in step two, it makes you feel all ooey gooey. Yeah, it sure does. Oh, look what I accomplished. Look what I did. See how it makes you feel? Just immerse yourself in it. Just immerse yourself in it. And know. You gotta know. What is the point of imagining if you're not gonna believe what you imagine? Oh, but Angela, isn't that delusion? Oh, dear God. You ever thought of somebody and they call you? Were you delusional? No, you just thought of them and they called you. But you didn't just think about them, you thought about them in a particular way. You were moved some way when you thought of them. Thus, they called you. That's what I'm trying to tell you. We hear the word delusional and we automatically, oh my God. No, imagining has nothing to do with delusion. If you say, listen, I need a job, if you get in your imagination and you're telling your bestie about the greatest job you've ever had to imply that the job is yours, how are you being delusional? Because next thing you know, you go out there in them streets and somebody said, hey, I was just thinking about you. Such and such is hiring. I could put in a good word for you. And you write your resume, just say I referred you. Were you delusional? When you got that job, were you delusional? Well, then sign me up. This is the point. We judge far too much. Shouldn't we be in 5 minutes of silence by now? Lord, have mercy. Somebody is so chatty tonight. I wonder who that is. But I'm just trying to make it make sense to you. What you rehearse, you become. And we are always in a state of becoming. This is why we don't stay one thing. There's an ebb and there's a flow. We don't stay one way. We grow and we mature and we expand and we become something else. Always in a state of becoming. So now you know that we are always in a state of becoming. What do you want to become? We begin to rehearse it. What would you naturally do? That's what these 5 minutes are for. That's what these 5 minutes are for as we sit here in the silence for 5 minutes. If you don't know what you'd be doing, you do know that you'd be grateful for it, don't you? You know that much. You'd be like, ooh, that was pretty close, but whew, down to the wire, we got it. Hallelujah. Thank you, Lord. However you want to say thank you. Some would say, ooh, won't he do it? Some will say that. Whichever way is natural for you to acknowledge what you have become, then imagine it. You don't have to tell anybody your business. Just fall in love with your imaginal act. That is what these 5 minutes of silence are for. Let us go into the silence for 5 minutes. And there concludes our 5 minutes of silence. I trust tonight, Noah, come on. I trust tonight that you found it helpful, these 2 chapters, and that you will apply, oh, for the love of God in all things. If you remember anything, remember how lots of people said, I always knew your teachings, but I was desperate, so I decided to try it. You're not the only one who feels frustrated by your present situation, but he's telling you the way forward. The way forward is the imagination of how you want it to be. When you look at things the way they ought to be instead of the way things are. The difference between the man of sense and the man of imagination. Not common sense, but eyes, ears, nose, mouth, skin. Yeah, that kind of sense. The senses. We can look at the senses and say, oh no, we've had no rain or no snow for 6 days. Whatever will we do for water? But if you get into your imagination, you can make it rain or make it snow. Oh, oh, people are doing it all over the place. They really are. Oh, but that's just a coincidence. What is a coincidence? The external experience that matches the internal thought. Hmm. As within, so without, yes? So, anyhow, are there any questions before we go? Because I don't want to keep y'all. It's almost 9 for me, 11 for some of you. And so, a good night's sleep is important. Anybody on fan base, raise your hand and let me know if you want to ask a question. So, you can just pop on in. But look, just let me do this. Because, like I said, I don't want to keep you long because, you know, I got to go to work in the morning, right? But I do want to take some time to ask if there are any questions. Did I miss?
Hey, Paul. Hey, my sister-in-laws.
Oh, hey. Did I miss inviting anybody? If you're like a little bit shy, you can drop it in the chat if you want to. Um, if there aren't any questions, remember to practice. Let us not be hearers, but be doers. You hear and you do. Why? Well, how else will you know if you don't practice? If you don't rehearse, how will you ever know? And I'm not even talking to y'all this night, I'm talking to myself, but you know how it is. You know how it is, right? Anyhow, you do know that I love you. And seeing as there aren't any questions, and any comments before we go? Hmm. Okay then.
I just want to say that I miss our camp. I haven't been around as much. I've been real busy here at home, but I'm glad to be here.
Mm. As always, Miss Fawn, it's a pleasure. Go ahead, Michael.
I just was gonna say it's a pleasant thing to have woke up this morning and had your pleasant words, positive words, and now to go to sleep. That's a good way to start in the day. Thank you.
Oh, wow. Well, thank you. Indeed. It's how I keep myself in line. I start the day in a fashion and I end it in a fashion. And I stay faithful to those 2 things because, you know, that's what you do, right? We're forming these habits. So when we form habits, form them so that they are useful to you. Because we can form any kind of habit we want. But that's why you know, choose the one that will uh, change your life. Oh, thank you for the love. Yes. So you see, that's all you do. Just practice. What are you gonna practice? Okay, you will know what you want to become. Hmm? Or should I say you know who you want to become? Who do you want to become? Hmm? Know that one. And when you know who you want to become, begin to rehearse in imagination that one thing that you know you would be doing if you were the man or the woman you wanted to be. And we all know what that one thing is. You know what it is based upon what you want to be. So then rehearse it and rehearse it, because I keep telling you, you're not pretending when you rehearse. When you rehearse something, especially if it has meaning to you, your brain is beginning to set down a neurological pathway the more you practice it. I give you the example this morning of tying your shoelaces. You think you get up today and you just learn how to tie them? You tie them the way you always have, the way you learned how to do. That's your neurological pathway. So, in order now to become who you say you want to become, rehearse, just like you were tying your shoes. Rehearse, 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 rehearse until it is so natural. You don't have to think about tying your shoes. You just know when you put your hand on laces, you can tie them. So it's the same principle. The same principle applies. Same principle applies. So step 3 is to feel it. Because something happens to you and you say, you know what? I'm setting down a groove. Ain't nothing but a groove thing, baby, right? You're setting a groove down in your brain. And the groove you set down in your brain is the pathway you have to live out. You learn how to read. That's a pathway in your brain. So don't think for any reason that the job isn't the same. The car isn't the same. The relationship isn't. It is all the same. And that's why you rehearse, to get it to be a groove thing. Just a groove thing. Johnny, hey, that one just came way out of nowhere. Ooh, that group was banging, but I digress. Look, that's what I'm trying to tell you. And you become so, Neville says, you just let it crowd everything else out of your mind, and you are so consumed with what you are rehearsing, you don't even stop to, are we there yet? Is it time? You don't even stop to do any of that. But the moment you see it, just like the woman in the story, when she wrote her letter, she said, oh my God, I saw it as it was happening. That's what you'll do. And when you do it, as always, my DMs will be wide open, waiting for you to come and fill it and tell me all about the experiences you had, and we can all throw confetti and celebrate together. And you know what we'd be celebrating? Not that you accomplished the thing, The thing to accomplish was inevitable. What we'd actually be celebrating is the fact that you remained faithful to who you said you wanted to become. That's what we celebrate. Because if you can see that, it has nothing to do with the thing. If you can see that you have the ability to remain faithful to your desires fulfillment, ain't nobody can stop you. But listen, I'm fired up. It's time for bed. There's no more comments, no more questions. We're good. All right then. Countdown initiated. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Much love to each and every one of you. And I'll see you on the morrow at 7 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. I don't know what the topic is yet, but it'll come, won't it? It always does. Anywho, I love you, and I'll see you on the morrow. Mwah, my darlings.